Okay, so we just got done listening to the Iron Rod intro on the harpsichord, and welcome to the Iron Rod podcast.
Yes.
I'm your co-host, Rhett, here with Peter.
Yo!
And John is off today.
Yeah, he needed the day off.
So he could work.
Is that what he was doing? He had to go into work today?
He's got a part-time job, temporary job as a census taker. So he's calling people.
So it's not even a part-time job. It's just a temporary job.
It's temporary. It's not part-time. It's actually full-time. It's just temporary because I guess counting 300 million people takes some time.
Yeah. Well, I did my duty. I filled out my form and sent it in back in April.
I told John about this. My roommates freaked out about the census. They're like freaked out by it. They didn't want to talk to they didn't fill out the form. They threw it away. I was going to fill it out.
Oh my gosh, they threw it away.
One lady came by. They didn't answer the door. A guy came by, and there was I guess there was 20 people over at my house, and they wouldn't open the door.
Wow.
So finally they opened it, and they lied to him. Yeah, and they gave a bunch of fake nicknames, IP free, stuff from The Simpsons type names.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, what? Are you guys serious? They're like, yeah, the government's using that information so they can fight. I'm like, are you serious?
Name, birth date, and phone number.
I'm like, really? That's what you're worried about is the census lady.
My friend Joey, who is a guy I do another podcast with, he was absolutely paranoid. He's like, I'm not giving out that personal information. I'm like, what personal information?
Well, they were afraid.
They're not getting anything off of you.
They're afraid they were casing the joint. What if they're casing the joint? There's 6 people who live here. Here's their phone numbers and names. I'm like, just go through our mailbox. You get the same info. I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, anyway.
Yeah, well, good luck to John with all this. Do you know what he's actually doing? I don't.
He's calling people to take, if they didn't fill out their forms, or you couldn't read them, or things like that.
Nice. All right, well.
It's a pretty good job, I guess. I'm kind of proud of him. Anyway.
Okay. Today's lesson was from lesson number 19 from the Sunday School Manual, and it was covering the book of Judges. The manual itself really only focused on the story of Deborah, the story of Gideon, and the story of Samson. I ignored all of the other ones, and I just went with Samson because I really liked the story of Samson and some of the cool parallels that you can draw between his life and our own life. So I basically started the lesson and said, hey, remember that New Mexico girl who that soccer player who was just pulled hair and kicked a bunch of BYU players. Anyway, she gave an interview where she basically said, "Oh, I have no idea who that person even is. That's just not me." And that was it wasn't really her defense, but that was what she had told the interviewer. She said, "When I look at that stuff, I just think, that's not even me. That's not my personality." And so we in class had a bit of a discussion about what type of person you are, and I used a quote by a guy by the name of Richard Carlson from the book Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, where he says, "Circumstances don't make a person; they reveal him or her." And then so we got into a discussion about character, which then led into what I was going to be spending the bulk of the lesson on, which was discussing the character of Samson and a lot of the character flaws he had. And this guy was seriously messed up. He just all sorts of problems. Most people think of Samson as apparently the guy with the hair. I always pictured him as the guy with the strength.
Yeah, that was funny in class. We're like, what was his outstanding quality? Hair. It's
hair?
Well, his hair gave him his strength. I thought it was interesting. The first comment you got about the New Mexico girl was what was the comment?
It came from Roxy.
Yeah, it did come from Roxy. And it kind of took you back, I noticed, but she brought it around pretty well.
She was basically defending the person, saying, look, that's not the only thing about her. That's just what we happen to have seen, that little snippet of her life. We have no idea what she's really like all of the other times. And, it's probably just a bad time, bad day that they caught her. And, all of the rest of us have those bad times where, we do some things where we're like, that is just not who we are. And that I never really kind of came around fully to that because we ended up going in some different directions. But I should have stated she's right. I mean, it's not a cut and dry sort of a line. That girl did those things out there, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that is who she is. That she is really just a dirty player and a mean person in general. That I would not want to suggest that at all. I think that we have bad times and we do some dumb things from time to time, but I think overall, if the majority of our time is not doing those, we're probably okay.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with you. And kind of her point, I think, is, we don't really know this person from one instance, and so
exactly.
If we, like the New Mexican soccer player, if we saw her over, say, a course of 5 or 6 years, and we knew how she was with her friends and her family, maybe she is an evil, hurtful person to everyone she's ever come in contact with. There are those people.
Yeah, or at least out on the soccer field, that's who she is. Because we know people like that.
We know, yeah.
Who are just jerks out on the field no matter what.
Yeah, I'm co-hosting a religious podcast with one.
Oh, that's not fair to say about John.
Well, the funny thing about Peter, to our listeners, is when he gets on the soccer field, he's loud. Very loud.
Yeah.
And it gets confused sometimes with anger. And I've had to tell some of our girls at Cohen, he's not mad at you. He just wants to get his point across.
I'm just shouting because you aren't listening. You won't do what I tell you to do. Why won't everyone just do what I tell them?
Maybe you are. Maybe it isn't anger. But
no, it's definitely anger. I've been angry several times.
But, to tie it back to the lesson, I think, what if we had one instance of Samson where it was he got angry once and did something once? Is that who he was? Maybe, maybe not. But pretty much the entire story of Samson is him getting a little cocky about something, teasing his wife, killing a whole bunch of people out of anger.
He definitely had an overconfidence to him. His self was completely reactionary. Oh, you did this to me? You know what? I'm going to do this to you. And everything about the guy, or at least that is written within the book of Judges, by the way, it's chapters 13 through 16, that was the story of Samson, is just completely reactionary over and over and over again. And on top of the anger issues that the guy had, he also had a problem with immorality. And, he saw women, he lusted after them, he took them, and I think it came because he felt no fear towards mortal men at all. And it's clear he didn't really seem to have much fear towards the Lord. Because it's very interesting. He was called for a specific purpose, to be someone who could help rid the Israelites of the Philistines. And it seemed only half-heartedly really did that. It seemed as though he could have used that gift of strength that he had from the Lord to do so much more for them, and he squandered it, is really where it ended up going. I concluded the lesson by talking and saying, okay, what is the gift that you have been given by the Lord? And by the way, you've received at least one gift and probably several more. So what is that gift? And then are you squandering your gift much like Samson does, where you use it for your own gain, for your own pride, your vanity, and are you misusing it? Is where I basically ended it.
And that was I thought that was the best thing to take out of the lesson, and applicable to our lives. Along with that, one part we didn't discuss, I was going to ask, and then we got sidetracked, so I just looked it up online for myself. The whole idea that Samson was a Nazarite?
Yes.
Is that how you say it?
Yes.
I looked up Nazarite, and part of the being a Nazarite is not cutting your hair.
That is correct.
So, by telling her and kind of, how do I say this? Telling her about her hair, who she's a non-believer, she's a Philistine, Delilah, having her, knowing that and getting his hair cut. I obviously at this point, 3 times he's told her what the source of his strength was, and 3 times she did it to try to sap his strength.
Yes.
So obviously he probably knew that she was going to try to do it again. And so in my mind, I almost picture it, and maybe this is the cinematical history of me coming up, but I picture it.
You wrote a screenplay.
I've seen the movie too. There's a great movie about Samson that's kind of along the lines of 10 Commandments. But in my mind, I see her after the time knowing, and she's begging with him. She's like, "If you love me, won't you tell me this?" And so I think at that point he kind of Supermans it and gives it up for her. And you remember Superman 2?
Yeah.
When he went to the little chamber thing, he lost his powers.
Yep.
I think Samson knew what he was doing. I don't think he fell asleep. Maybe I could be wrong, but I think he fell asleep. No, he knew that she was going to do that, and so I think he was giving up the Nazarite in him, his vows, and that was a vow he had made. And so I think that's when he broke his covenant with the Lord and lost his strength. And I think we can look at us too. What gifts have we been given? What covenants have we made? And then we purposely violate him. And as it said in there today, the Lord withdrew himself, or the Spirit withdrew. I can't remember what the
it's very, very interesting wording in chapter 16 of Judges. I think I ended up just skipping that part because we were so late with time, and I was like, it's really not that important. No, just skip it. Let me see if I can find it.
And the Lord was departed from him. It's in verse 20. Verse 20.
Okay, good. Yeah, and he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. He didn't even realize it. And I think it was because he had been so confident in himself and like, I'm invincible. And, he gave up his secret. And I just don't understand that type of mentality. But I guess that's maybe a good thing. Maybe I'm not like Samson.
That's probably a good thing. Well, Samson, one other part we didn't talk about, he was a judge, right?
He was.
For 20 years, I read in here?
Yeah, it was for a space of 20 years in his life. So this reads so quickly that most people think that it just happened one right after the other. It was a span of 20 years that this guy was a judge over the tribe or the area in which he lived. Most of the book of Judges talks about many of the different judges. So essentially, each tribe had their own judge who was to oversee them. And so we just have, snippets of, a seldom few within the book of Judges.
Okay. That's and I just want to clarify that because I was like, well, this didn't happen in 1 year. He was around for a while. Yeah. The part about the eyes being put out, I read an interesting thing online about there were some other characters in history who had their eyes put out, and one religious commentator said he had his eyes put out because he had not followed them. I thought that was interesting that Samson was blind to the ways of the Lord, so he lost his eyes.
That's a great point. I actually had planned, I had probably about 10 minutes of material that I was planning to use, but we ended up going so long I couldn't. I was planning to talk about blindness and spiritual blindness. I was even going to use blind spots in your cars. When you're driving along, there are certain spots that an entire vehicle can be in, and you will have no idea because you cannot see it in your rear view mirror or your side mirror. And if you do you have spiritual blind spots, and how do you identify what those spiritual blind spots are? There's some very, very fascinating scriptures from like 1 Nephi 15:24 where it talks about the iron rod, that Satan is targeting his fiery darts at your eyes to blind you, to lead you away.
That's cool.
And even in the story of Abinadi, the words that are used in there, it says in Mosiah 11:29, the people were blinded to the point that they wouldn't believe Abinadi's words anymore. And so it's interesting that they choose to use the words blindness. It's very, very fascinating about that.
Cool. What's another point? Oh, and one other point I had, and Alexis actually mentioned it to me because she was sitting next to me in your lesson, how the similarities between Samson's birth and the Savior's birth. His mother was...
Oh, yeah, okay.
And even Abraham. Abraham, yeah.
Yeah, it happens several times throughout the scriptures where you essentially have this barren woman, and a blessing of the Lord happens to bring about this person, and they are then to go and serve the Lord. It's interesting. I like the scripture from Doctrine and Covenants section 121 where it talks about where many are called but few are chosen. This is one of those instances where one was called, but in the end he's not going to end up getting chosen. Much like David.
I saw a lot of similarities with David, and maybe it's because we're getting close to David. Mm-hmm. And David's probably my favorite Old Testament story. But similarities. I mean, David morally sinned as well. Mm-hmm. Samson did. David was given strength. Samson was. I mean, he wrestled the bear. Samson killed the lion. Right?
Yeah.
Pretty much is the story. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know what other parallel I was going to draw there, but
yeah, there were other stories from the Book of Judges that, we know the story of Gideon very well, where he takes and fights off the entire army of the Midianites, I think, with only 300, and that was to show to the Israelites, look, with the Lord's help, you can do anything that you want, and you don't need a huge army to go against these people. So, anyway, I like the story of Samson. I think it was has some good parallels for our lives specifically, and especially considering the fact that how young most of us are in our ward. It's a good reminder.
Well, yeah, actually, another point I was thinking about during the lesson, I forgot to write down. Did he spend all his time with the Philistines?
Seemed like he kind of did.
I mean, if he's a judge in his tribe, he's a Danite, correct?
Yes.
So
it was from the tribe of Dan, is what that means.
Yeah, his first wife is a Philistine.
Correct.
He's hanging out with them. They burn down her house and her father's house and burn him, from what we understand. So then Delilah is also a Philistine.
The harlot that he...
the harlot that was a Philistine.
That he laid with, yeah.
It was like pretty much he was hanging out with Philistines the whole time. So he's, another example of don't hang out with the wrong people.
Yeah, it's true. His responsibility was to help rid the Israelites from being under the burden of the Philistines. And instead he seemed to kind of just end up embracing their culture.
Yeah, he's living with them. And
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. It's all. Well, that's all I have for Samson. Did you have
No, I think we covered...
the title of your lesson. It was Samson, the Strongest Weakling. I liked it.
Yeah. It just seems... The guy is known for his physical strength, but when it comes to being morally strong, he is absolutely, categorically the weakest out there. He just made some really, really dumb decisions when he could have been an incredibly powerful person to lead the Israelites from being under the bondage of the Philistines. And, it's a shame he squandered it.
Cool. Well, should we move on?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Good with me.
Amazing how much faster this is when John isn't here.
Yeah, he just won't shut up.
We were reviewing some of our topics, see what we want to talk about today. And really, without John here, we feel bad telling one of his topics. And some of my topics I want John to be here for. So the one we kind of decided on was the proper way to pass the sacrament and the roles in classes. Peter, would you like to start off?
Okay, yeah, my big beef here is with the sacrament. The sacrament's supposed to be a time when people are reflecting and, they're renewing their covenants with the Lord. And we have the priesthood, whether they be, the little deacons with their, super long ties and white shirts that are untucked, or, the elders' quorum in our ward, where they're, taking the sacrament around. Oftentimes, you end up with a bench that has a couple of people on one end and one person on the other end, and completely vacant in between.
A really long bench, too.
Yes. And so it's very, very staggered out, and you've got a lot of people this way and that way. I've noticed from time to time that the elders will just hand the tray off, and then they'll just turn. And then they'll make the person, the one person down on the end, cross the entire bench over to the other side to give it to those people. And it drives me bonkers as to why they don't just look around and say, okay, here's where people are sitting at. I'm going to go out of my way to not interrupt them and just make sure they get the tray. So if there's just that one person on the end, I pass it to that one person, and then I move on to the next bench. And the other person on the other side of that row should be smart enough to say, oh, okay, there's only one person down there, so I don't need to worry about them because the other guy got her. I'm going to take care of these two people that are sitting here on this edge. I'll get those two people. And if they do that, then no one gets interrupted. No one has to get up and move the tray all the way across the...
That's funny. I didn't know where you were going with this topic, but that's funny.
Oh, man. I one time drew for Scott. He is our Elders Quorum president. I drew for him the exact layout of where everyone was sitting in the benches, and to show him that there were, of the 7 benches people were sitting on, 5 of them, the people had to get up and move the tray down clear across to the other side for the other people.
I think it's just a pay attention thing. I mean,
yes, that's really all my point is look around and notice where people are sitting at, and then since you're the one who's walking the sacrament around, you have the responsibility at that time as the priesthood holder to give the sacrament to them, that you actually take it to them and don't make them do your job. How lazy do you have to be?
I don't think it's lazy. I think it's tradition and habit. That's what they did in their homewards growing up, and the benches were relatively full.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you just
absolutely.
send it down.
Family wards, very much so. They're all full. So I get that, but still.
No, we should just pay attention.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, I'll get off my high horse.
I like that soapbox. I was thinking more along the lines of like, I remember when I turned 12, man, we had it mapped out. We had the whole room mapped out. I was backside or back middle, left side.
We numbered everything.
It was awesome. And we hadn't even had an order of we would get into to return it, so the bad guy could peel off.
You know what's so funny is the fact that I don't know how I'm every other week. The week I'm not teaching Sunday school, I'll always go up and bless the sacrament. And so I watch the guys at the back, and they're like confused as to which order they need to get into in order to walk back up.
Well, the funny part is after the water, it's like you don't have to. You just
yes,
it doesn't
exactly.
Matter the order
That's
anymore.
another point. Yeah. Good reminder about that.
Let me tell you a mission story that'll bug you. So,
I know this story.
I get to Chile, and I noticed it in my first ward, but I didn't have the chutzpah to say anything until my next ward.
Yeah, you were too young, too green.
The Chileans, they take the Doctrine and Covenants literally, if they've read it, I assume. And when they pass the sacrament, they hand it to every person. So, like, you know how we're in rows, we just send the tray down the rows?
Yeah.
No. They go down the rows and knock knees with everyone down the row to pass it to every person. Some wards, it doesn't matter because there's only 15 people. But you get a ward with 80, 90 people, which is a good ward in Chile, and it gets kind of annoying. And so one week, my companion had passed sacrament, and I sent it down the row. And he, being from Idaho, sent it back to me down the other row. And the congregation didn't even notice. They just passed it along. They didn't think twice about it. And we got called into by the bishop, and he was like, "Elders, you can't do that." And I'm like, "What do you mean you can't do that?" "Well, what if they don't have the priesthood?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "What if you get a row full of women?" I'm like, "So?" "What if you get a row full of non-members?" I'm like, "So?" And he's like, "Well, they can't do that." I'm like, "Bishop, I will tell you this right now. In the Prophet's Ward, this is how they do it." "Well, how do you know that?" I'm like, "Just trust me. This is how they do it in Salt Lake City. They just send it down the rows." And he was like upset by it, and we had to have a talk about it. And I talked to my mission president about it. He said, and he told us, like, elders, part of the reason there are so many foreign missionaries called to serve in Chile, because Chile's got a pretty big membership base, is so we can teach them the good traditions of the church. And he even talked about Nephi having the good traditions of the Nephites. He's like, there are traditions of the church that, because the church is so new in Chile, they haven't learned yet, and they need to learn that, there's certain ways you can do things. That was one of them, and I just laughed. I just thought it was funny. I'm like, we just pass it down the road.
That would be so hilarious to watch people, like, literally try and get around other people's knees, because those benches are pretty, they're comfortable, but your knees, or at least my knees, come right up to the edge of the back of the bench.
Most people do,
and
it was awkward, and it was funny, and I just always thought. And then they started to have, I heard a story about, they said that the priest should wash their hands before blessing the sacrament. Great idea. We would all love that, right?
Yes.
And I remember even my home ward, we had wet naps up there for us and stuff. Well, one of the wards in Chile took it too literal, and they had, because the teachers were supposed to prepare the sacrament, they asked the teacher to have a little basin up there for them so they could wash their hands, because they didn't have running water up there. Well, then it got a little too Catholic, and the teachers were pouring the water over the priest's hands, kind of as part of the ceremony. And the elders, I guess the elders in the audience were just like, jaws dropped, like, oh, this isn't right. Like, we need to have a talk about this afterwards.
Oh,
like,
man, that is so awesome.
It got, and they, handing the, like, putting the towel. It was like, this is okay. We meant just wash your hands. And yeah, since the teachers are preparing a sacrament, it'd be great for them to have a bowl and a towel up there. We didn't mean for them to actually do the washing. Like,
that's so funny.
Oh, but they're awesome. I love Chileans. They're just, and they really are trying. That's the good thing. They're trying. They're just, sometimes.
It's just so different, so foreign to them because it's
new.
The way we were brought up.
We've been past the sacrament here in Utah for 150 years.
Yeah.
They've only, the church didn't get there till the late 70s and really didn't take off till the 90s. And that's when I was there. So it was,
so
love
funny.
them though. Anyway, so that passes the sacrament. Yeah, I'm with you. Just pay attention, elders out there, if you're hearing this.
Let's see, passing the rolls?
Yes. Passing the rolls. I will tell you how the sisters do it, and I will tell you I've been chastised by the sisters for this. So what was your...
No, this wasn't even my idea.
John's?
No, I don't know. It wasn't
I think
my
it was John's,
idea.
and I think the problem was when we passed the rolls in church, or in elders' quorum, and we would say in Sunday school, is people take forever. They look down at and you look around a room. Let's say you got 30 people in a room. If everybody takes a minute, that's 30 minutes for the thing to get around.
Right.
It's not a simple go down, mark your name, flip it over, and read the announcements. The problem is they had too many things getting on the rolls. So you get 4 or 5 things. Yeah, it might take 2 or 3 minutes per person. But this is another thing I think where John was talking, especially when the classroom isn't set up conventionally, where it doesn't snake around correctly, where somebody will just take it and then set it on a desk.
Yeah.
It's like, really? You know what we're doing with this. Why did you just set that on a desk? It obviously is supposed to go one way or the other.
It's not just supposed to... You're not passing it around to get it to that desk.
It doesn't get to you when you're done. Like, you need to pass this around. And, it's... I think it's going back to the pay attention. But the sisters are smart. They actually created 2 rolls.
Yeah.
They're essentially duplicate. And I think even smarter than that, rather than have one clipboard with everything, feed them out one at a time, Like if you've got 5 items, send around one thing. The only problem with that is then you
got to have like 5 pens to go around.
Yeah, you
most
do.
Of the time.
But the problem is that then you've got 5 people distracted at once instead of 1.
Yeah, that's true.
But it will move around faster. I don't know. I think his point was that it doesn't end on a desk in the back. But I think my point is there are more efficient ways than just the rolls. I mean, if it's just the roll, fine. If it's roll with a handout, that's what the sisters did. They have handouts. It's like you don't pass around one piece of paper with the announcement. You pass around 40 pieces of paper and you take one and then read it later.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I like it. I think that was Anya's
Killing
or
a lot
Suzanne.
of trees.
Yeah, they're already dead. We're just using the ones that are dead. That's why we have email and the church website. And the church website, bless its heart, I feel like they still need to improve. I will critique them. If they want to call me, I'll be happy to give my suggestions.
They have taken some great steps.
It's gotten better in the last
in the
year.
past. Yeah, I think they had to eventually kind of shut down the whole, because there were people who were setting up their own ward websites.
Yeah.
And they had to kind of shut that down to say, okay, here's the format and the way that if you're going to do it, this is where we want you doing this stuff. And I never really go to the ward website unless I need to get the ward directory. Yeah. Like I need to get someone's phone number or email address. That's why I go there. So I don't ever use it for like the announcements or anything else.
See, and I think that's the area that could use improvement. I mean, let me integrate it with my Outlook or Google Calendar or text message reminders or...
Right, yeah. If they set some sort of RSS feed.
Or not, yeah, just do an RSS. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, it's all public information. It's not... we're inviting people to stuff.
Actually, I think the RSS feed would actually be really good because most people have Google Reader. And that's essentially...
Most people you know.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Fair point. But, they could easily post that thing to, I don't know, anywhere really. And get the people, all they have to do is subscribe to it. They could even just do an email subscription thing. So as, a new announcement goes up there, an email gets triggered out to everybody. Granted, that's going to cause a huge load on the email servers for the church. And there's, a huge problem that, you've now just created because you're going to do that. but it's something that I could see them doing down the line.
Well, let's hope they do.
Yeah.
All
right, are we good with rolls? Did we rant enough about them?
Yeah, I think it's just pay attention. Don't look at everybody else's name to see who hasn't been. Like, ooh, this guy hasn't marked an X in his box for the last
to
3
be
weeks.
fair, I'm often guilty of that because I'll actually go through. If I've seen where the roll has come from, I'll look through where the roll needs to go, and I'll actually mark people who are already there in class.
Awesome.
I've done that to you and John a lot. Just because...
No, you see where it's going for me. You don't see where it came from.
It's funny because I like watching the reaction on their face. They're like, wait, how did I mark myself already here? How did this happen? It's just my weird amusement that I get.
Funny. It's okay, especially because it takes you less than a minute.
Yeah, to make an X.
But
I've managed to get that down under 30 seconds now for one X.
But people, man, I don't know. Anyways, good rants. And, just pay attention. That's all.
Yeah.
And I think we could do that for everything in church. Pay attention to people who aren't there you don't recognize. I sat next to a girl in your lesson today. I didn't know who she was, so I introduced myself.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name, but I introduced myself. She was nice, and I think she's newer, and I think she was happy that somebody introduced herself.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with that in general. I mean, would that more people would actually pay attention to what's going on around them? I'm okay with that.
Hey, I'm one of the most self-aware people I know.
All right, so that's basically the end of our podcast for today. It's, I guess, pretty short.
By our standards.
Yes. If any of you have any topics out there that you want to rant about, or maybe it's some of the topics we've talked about, we do have the blog address, IronRodcast.blogspot.com, and basically put your comments up there or email us IronRodcast@gmail.com.
Yes.
And I guess we'll see you next week.